I'm very happy to welcome Boaz Feldman, who is founder of the Neurosystemics and who is here resides with Life Itself Praxis Hub and with his team organizing the residency. And we're really happy to welcome you here. And first of all, maybe you could just tell us more about you, who you are and where you come from. We'll start from that.
So I was born in Geneva in Switzerland and lived there many years, but then educated in different countries. One of the things that has driven a lot of things that I have done has been an early existential crisis in my early adolescence, feeling a lot of anxiety, sense of imminent death, not really understanding it fully, but feeling a sense of urgency around engaging with that question. And so, even through university, just finding less and less possibilities of how to handle that. Then became a Buddhist monk and thought maybe meditation, had a calling to do a long-term practice there. And somehow there were many limitations there, so I returned back to Switzerland after some years in Thailand and engaged in psychology practice and worked in different fields also where death is very central, like humanitarian emergencies, crises, conflict-affected regions. And that was very helpful for me to be able to explore this theme professionally and also interpersonally. And then, really taking some further steps there from my own sort of internal contemplative practice into clinical practice with others, individuals and then groups. And now, extending this movement of care, of finding aliveness and dealing with these patterns of dissociation and freeze and just the sense of suffering that a lot of us experience at the level of community. And so that's really why I'm very excited about being at Life Itself and seeing how this multi-layered perspective of how we experience our self, from like the very visceral moment-to-moment experience to the larger sort of community being, that actually I think we all experience as a spectrum of self on a daily basis, can then be brought to words and also have practices to be able to map it out and engage in this variety of self-making and way of enjoying maybe also this neurobiological history we have as humans to be a part of a community, and I think is really a huge lack for so many of us, and a very strong limitation of most mental health approaches and resilience building approaches, which are oftentimes just focused on the individual. That's like a broad, in a couple of brushstrokes, introduction of where I am. And
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to these points which you touched about the centeredness on self or on the group, on the position. But before to go there, it would be good to maybe speak a bit more about the NGO, about the organization which you founded, about Neurosystemics. If you could just describe to a person who is completely not aware of psychology, what it is, what do you do, and why did you founded it?
So I've been working in the field of trauma healing and training for about 10 years before I founded Neurosystemics. And all of the approaches that I have been trained in focus just on the individual. So there's always been kind of this cultural assumption that, when you deal with trauma, you necessarily work at it at the individual level. And one of the paradoxes that I found quite striking is that one of the main theoretical frameworks that drives trauma healing, from Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory, he describes, a trauma healing nervous system as the social engagement system. And this social engagement, it always didn't make sense to me. Like, why are we so much focusing on just one individual practice when it's a social engagement system? So there's something about being together or being with others that is neurobiologically really powerful in order to deal with these like more or darker states that we all have of freeze and trauma and such. And then it became very clear over the course of my practice that, and humanitarian practice in particular, that the community is really the primary factor to get correct when we engage in this resilience building process. Like, so much can happen in community, and so much easier if the community is organized in a way that is, of course, mostly functional. Can never be perfect. That actually not so much hyper individualized micro interventions need to be done at the individual level for a lot of things to happen. So I was like, actually, I'd like to build an organization and work on a method that of course includes all of this genius and very technical knowledge of how to support and attune to the nervous system moment to moment. But then how do we sort of extend that into group process? And how do we even extend that further into a few groups coming together into a community process? And nobody was doing that. And so I founded Neurosystemics because nobody else was doing it. And I combined my group work experience with Irvin Yalom in the US with all of the somatic approaches. And now I feel very fortunate to have a couple of teams online and different places to be able to offer trainings. And basically the one thing we're offering is how to connect to oneself in a way which is helpful and supportive in building resilience. How do we engage with others to be more authentic, to be more ourselves? And then how do we nourish these relationships such that we can be fully authentic or as authentic as possible? And we can also see what the impact is with others, which is like a two-parter in relationships. There's me and then there's the other. And oftentimes if we have dysfunctional relationships, it's because either we're too much of ourselves or not enough of ourselves, and that's because we don't really know what's going on with the other. So it's like there's only so much we can do about ourselves, and then we really need to have that experiential process in the relationship to be able to learn how to be in a relationship. We don't learn that at school. It's a basic thing that we all need, that we can't have a really happy life without having good relationships. And there's solid data today to show that. It really is like an incredibly important factor. So it's just that simple skill, how to be ourselves in relationships. That's what you could sum it up with, like the purpose of this work.
And so if I go on the website of Neurosystemics and I'm completely outsider, right, and I go and read about what you do, I first write things which I read is that you do actually different types of work. You do care trainings, you do resiliency circles, and there are also other activities. So, and I would like to start maybe to tell more about maybe we can start with resiliency circles. Maybe could you explain what actually it is, and maybe also relate to things which lay people like me may know, right? Like, for example, how they're organized, why, and for whom they are, right? Yeah. Like, is it for everyone, or maybe some people may not be able to to do them?
Yeah. So these groups are for everybody. Or let's say most people. The only people that we perhaps wouldn't work with are people who perhaps have a very long history of mental health issues, or who are part of the system in psychiatric care, because we have an a training, and it's an organization that is in between the formal structural mental health care and also lay people. So we have people who are trained, but also not psychiatrists or doctors. And what are they? Resiliency circles are small groups, 6 to 9 people, and when we come into a room together, we are exploring how it is to be in the room together in the present moment. And so as you and me are sitting right now, you have feelings, there are certain sensations that are present in the body, there are certain things that you feel you'd like to be able to share, maybe some things you feel a bit more reluctant to share, maybe some things you'd like to share but you feel nervous about. There's all sorts of things going on in our interaction. And this is happening all the time in all of our interactions. And so the group process is kind of as hopefully a safe enough space to be able to be more and more transparent for ourselves in terms of how we are doing moment to moment. And that safety is really a key part about how we can learn best. Because from a nervous system approach, anyone in a daily basis, whether you're at work, whether you're in your family, whether you're with friends, there are some moments you're going to feel uncomfortable with them. There's someone says something and makes you ill at ease, and then sort of maybe you retract back. So something makes you feel like it's inhibiting you being fully yourself. And in the group, these things happen also sometimes. And so we can say, okay, so when you say something that's a bit difficult about your day, actually, I feel like maybe what I have to share, which might also be difficult, is not welcome because we have to listen to you, and then I become unimportant. Maybe that's my pattern, right? Which actually, to some extent, is. But maybe that's not the case. Maybe actually it's okay for me to also share what I have, and I don't have to just fall into this habit of diminishing myself because you somehow become more important. And so we all have these patterns of how we get into relationship and how actually they become unsatisfactory. Maybe we diminish ourselves, or on the contrary, maybe we're like, very, very aggressive or very angry all the time, and it's difficult for us to maybe restrain ourselves, and we hurt more people than we would like. We'd like to be able to share things that are meaningful and important to us without necessarily hurting other people. So we can still be honest, but there's maybe more care in terms of how that can be heard. And in these groups, we really learn to sense into all of these impulses, all these ways in which we engage and disengage in relationship, and welcome everything. And from there, perhaps we can learn new ways of being in relationship that are happier, that are more, authentic, that are deeper, that are even, in a way, healing. Some of us have experienced very difficult relationships in our past, and it's maybe difficult to trust another person. Or maybe we don't feel like they'll lend us a kind, listening, compassionate ear. And maybe we can sort of reprogram that through this space where there's enough capacity, there's enough resiliency. So that's why we call them resiliency circles, where it's an emergent space. We don't know what's going to be next. There's no structure as to what needs to come next. And we're just allowing this moment-to-moment experience of everybody in the group to unfold, with facilitators there holding the space. And eventually, over time, they become less and less important because the group becomes more and more mature in terms of knowing each other and being able to hold themselves what's going on without the facilitators, this sort of top-down influence to be necessary. And the group becomes more, technically we talk about as self-organizing. It's like there's this natural capacity for each member to be able to respond to one another because they have this basic skill of being ourselves and then hearing how that lands for others. It's like this dual part of the relationship. So that's and those groups can be 12 weeks, they can be 24 weeks, they can be, some groups have lasted for a couple of years. My mentor Irvin Yalom is part of a group that lasted 35 years. So it's really they can be quite a long-term experience as well.
And I have two questions regarding that. So if we kind of go a bit out of this topic and try to understand why actually and how, not how it works, but why this approach, right? Why this type of technique which you're proposing, why it would work. maybe from the clinical perspective, maybe from how would you explain it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe results of that, or
most of therapy focuses on what's wrong. And so when you have these groups, there's a lot of focus, and in fact, some psychotherapists get very excited at going deeper into what the problem is. And that, every one of us has difficulty dealing with problems. Like for nobody a problem is just completely issue-free or stress-free. There's always some proportionate amount of that. And in a way, if we only focus on what's wrong, then it can create kind of a circular dynamic where things can become more and more intense. And so the issue is not that we want to exclude what's wrong. We need to talk about problems. Everybody has issues, even therapists as well, of course. And yet, maybe what's different in our approach is that we also put a lot of emphasis on what's right. And because we are able to have that movement between, what's going well and celebrate that and enjoy that, and really allow the goodness of that to be felt in the body as well, which is another second part. There's like what's right, and then there's really the integration of what's right in the body, in the emotions. And those two parts help to create space so that we can also include what's wrong, we can also include what the problem is and issues that come up, which they do, in a way that is a little bit lighter and actually gives a perception of what's wrong that's also easier to handle. Because it's, we're shifting the paradigm from people has a pathology, somebody has a problem, and that's just how it is. Now we know that actually how you are in the very moment that you talk about your problem influences what the problem is. Meaning, if you're in a place that you're very stressed during the group, that makes the problem 100 times heavier than if you're in a place where actually you're quite relaxed in the body and quite relaxed in the group. And then you talk about your problem. It physically, we know, there's solid data to show that. It makes it a very different experience. Mm-hmm. And so we put a lot of emphasis on creating as much spaciousness and ease and enjoyment and safety in particular. That's a key part. So that we can also bring in the more challenging parts, and then we can include everything more and more easily. Unfortunately, there's still very little empirical data in terms of a somatically positively oriented group approach. So I can't boast any data at this point, but there is more and more interest in that direction, and even as a facilitator, the work also is changed. We learn to really also have more fulfillment and enjoyment in the work. It doesn't all have to be about our darkest, and most terrible memories, and the unconscious doesn't have to be this what is it that Freud called it, this cellar with a bastard spawn, it's like this view of the unconscious that's tremendously negative. And while everybody has challenges, in fact, maybe life can be a bit brighter, and it's more than just about problem solving, but it's also about fulfillment and developing these qualities to have more joyful experiences in relationships. So that would be an outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, so it becomes a bit more indeed clear what's at the core, and maybe we could talk a bit more about results, or maybe you could tell more about some of the cases where it worked in a very special way. Maybe you have some experiences when it helped someone, for example.
Sure. Yeah, I can give you plenty of clinical examples.
Yeah.
From my experience. So there's this one lady, for example, she comes from Turkey, and as a woman, she's struggled a lot. She has a very assertive character. And as a woman in Turkey, she's struggled a huge amount in being put down by men. This is something in Turkey in particular is I think it might happen in a lot of places, but it happened. definitely for her. And in her entire life, she's really fought that. She's fought that very strongly. And she fought that in kind of an aggressive way. And in fact, she's had several breakups because of it. There's come to a place where she really wanted to assert her own value in the relationship, which is, of course, a very healthy thing. And yet, there were some challenges in terms of how that could have a place in the relationship without breaking the relationship. And so it's always a complex dynamic. Is it her? Was it her boyfriends? I don't know the details. But what has shifted over the group is that she was able to come to a place where she still felt, that strong power and that capacity to assert herself. And to say when she really disagreed, or she sometimes had even some judgment about other people in the group. But now she's been able to do it in a way that that is not just softer and more easily in terms of her own experience. Like, actually, she feels quite relaxed in saying all that. But it actually is a way of making connection with the people that she is actively, in a way, directing her judgments at, or her criticism at. And I can give you an example. For one time that she was speaking to, I was facilitating the group, and there were a couple of people who were interacting, and I was saying, maybe for other people in the group, they're feeling a little bit left out now, because there's been this interaction between three people, and a couple of people hadn't been sharing. And she spontaneously, with a little smirk, opened up her mic, it was on Zoom, and said, I don't give a fuck what you think. And she said it in a way where it's like, it is something that I thought about, and I am going to be strong without needing for you to need to include me. So I don't need you, kind of energy. But because we had several toggles like that, and now she's saying it with a little smile, and also she didn't barge into the conversation, but she could say it at a rhythm where maybe I was also in a place that I could hear it. It didn't feel like an interruption. It was also at a time there was a rhythmic interaction where I was ready to hear it as a facilitator. She had it already in her heart that she wanted to say something like that, and she could say it with a little smirk and without being so pungent with me. And so that's a really dramatic change from other times earlier in the group where she would have interrupted the conversation. She would have criticized things that were said in the conversation in relationship to certain things that maybe she disagreed with, and still, maintain her authenticity and not push back on, not hold back on still being able to share authentically her opinion, and the fact that she's a strong character without me needing to take care of her. So I don't know if that's a clear example in terms of how she's been able to, in ways, share her point of view in a way that we can laugh about it together. And still, she's making the point, like, I don't need you. I'm strong by myself. So that shows that she was able to hold the charge of maybe some upset or maybe some tension that she was experiencing without needing to interrupt the conversation like she had previously.
So you basically created a safe container, as you describe it, right? For her, to express what she was doing. Can it be described this way?
Yes.
Right, using your terminology.
Yeah, like over the course of the relationship, we had this interaction which was tense for me and tense for her, and over the course of talking about what is important to her, which was to be able to share her judgments without necessarily creating a rupture. She was able to really think about that and then see, like, okay, so how can I say it in a way that he can hear it? And she really got there. I mean, that's just one example, but she seems to be flourishing in other relationships where her anger is not an issue so much, without having disconnected that part from her, because this is often what happens. Oftentimes we will just not share our honest opinion, and then kind of like fawn. This is another nervous system state. It's like we will submit to, you know, whatever other people want, because, you know, it's creating tension. And so it's a tightrope to negotiate how you can be honest and how the other can also hear it. Yeah. And the safety, the fact that I was also transparent as a facilitator and shared some difficult emotions at times when we were in the group, that also built her trust. Like, you know, I'm not there to be controlling her. I'm more there just to explore together and see how we can find a way for the group and one another to be fully ourselves, which is a really difficult thing. Like, human relationships are infinitely complex. And so the safety and the sense of exploration and the sense of also joy and ease when it's there, like really grabbing and enjoying that, integrating that, allows for also these more challenging moments to be helpful rather than destructive, because we need the dark. I mean, the dark is just the shadow from the light shining.
Yeah, and actually I wanted to thank you, Boaz, for sharing that. I wanted to come back actually to what initially you said about this kind of your journey, right? That you were doing the work also with humanitarian action. And if you could speak more also about these aspects of the neurosystematics work, precisely also more about the care trainings, maybe the experience which you had in Turkey, earthquake, whatever you actually feel like sharing, because it would be very important.
Mm-hmm. So the care training, yeah. So in my practice as a clinician, you know, there's like several ways in which I help. One is to actually work with people in sessions individually, and everyone in my team also does that. And then in a way, kind of a double loop way to support people is to help them fish rather than just to give them the fish, right? And so there's a really strong emphasis for me in terms of like, how can we create the conditions so that people can help themselves and then they can help others. So it's a bit like a facilitator training program where, first of all, we take time to find out about our own experience. So we find out about our own emotions, you know, which emotions are difficult, how to hold them. We find out about the ways in which we engage and disengage in relationship, and then see if there's ways we can be more free by doing the group process, for example. So there's a lot of our own personal development in this 3-year training. And because in a way, in these sessions, we are, as humans, as the facilitator, we are our own instrument. And so to the extent that we've been able to be free in relationship and show our vulnerability without anxiety or shame, then, you know, that's a modeling that our clients, our friends, our family, our colleagues can then benefit from implicitly without even us doing anything. It's just the way we are, and then therefore that just becomes something that they can feel. And then there's a second part, which is the more sort of technical or the more sort of professional aspect of it, although therapeutic presence is becoming an increasingly important factor for healing, even in the empirical data, is the conceptual framework around how somatics, so how the body and the nervous system dynamics in particular can help to understand our own experience and also understand where the people that we interact with, where they're at, and then to attune our interventions in the most skillful and adaptive way to be able to help them just take that next step towards dealing with a challenge or enjoying what's pleasurable. It's always the two sides of the coin, the dark and the light. And so it's a skill building training whereby we learn to hold space for individuals, we learn to hold space for small groups, we learn to hold space for communities, so that they can then be more and more themselves. They can experience the power of vulnerability, of authenticity, assertiveness, bring compassion, and all of those can then help them to be self-regulated and then help the regulation of the group and the community as a whole. So it's a multi-layered facilitation training to help help ourselves, help individuals, help small groups, and help communities. And it's really just, the principles are always the same. It's just, there's a tweaking, of course, in the interventions. And that's why it's a 3-year process, because it takes quite a while to be able to go through that whole personal developmental journey and really be more free internally, and then have enough capacity and confidence to accompany individuals in small groups. Yeah.
And you were also doing that, or like at least that's what you can read right on the from the newsletter, that you were recently using that in the humanitarian actions. Maybe you can speak more about that.
Yeah, so we have a big program in Turkey, and there's obviously been these earthquakes recently, and a big part of the trauma that's occurred, of course, has to do with the physical damage and the number of deaths and the destruction that's involved. And yet there's like a wider systemic issue around the more sort of political and economic situation in which everybody in the country has been affected by. And so we could call that systemic trauma. And so our approach is in a way can be very useful because we don't focus on the individual so much, although we can. These are issues that are relevant, like everybody experiencing the same trauma at the same time. And so groups and community processes can be very adaptive to hold these collective experiences. In fact, it would be kind of so we've been doing a lot of groups, a lot of small groups, and particularly as an organization, since we have a whole training in Turkey, we've been offering support spaces for our trainees who have also been practicing and offering groups to people who are vicariously affected by the earthquakes. And in these small groups, then there's 2 functions. One is just a space where people can be heard, because even just verbalizing a pain can oftentimes help to make it lighter and softer. And secondly, also explore a little bit the more sort of collective trauma that everybody is experiencing in terms of building agency. So we're holding the pain, and then we're seeing, what feels like an empowering action. That's the part that at the community level, like resilience at the community level, is more about activism or militantship. And there's a lot of resiliency that can be felt through the hope that people can get in thinking that an action collectively can perhaps help change these wider systemic dynamics. So it's like the collective organism of the community is making an action to build the resiliency of these systems that are suffering.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. And I also saw that there are a lot of other materials, right, which you can read on the Neurosystemics, like also including the Neurosystemic Dharma, the meditation which you offer. And we can perhaps discuss it more next time. And
Sure. Yeah. There's it's the latest program, so we can talk about that another time.
Thank you.